It is now 4:35 p.m. and I'm calling this meeting of the Design Review Board to order. Recording Secretary, please call roll.
Board Member Birch is absent. Board Member Cook is absent, but he'll be arriving late. Board Member Liptak?
Here.
Board Member Sharon?
Here.
Board Member Withrich?
Here.
Vice Chair Weigel?
Here.
Chair Jones-Carter?
Here.
Let the record reflect that all board members are present with the exception of Board Member Birch and Board Member Cook, who will be arriving late.
Item 2, approval of minutes, and there are no minutes to approve. Item 3, public comment. We are now taking public comment on item 3, non-agenda matters. This is the time when any person may address the board on matters not listed on this agenda, but which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of this committee. Recording Secretary, can you please provide instructions to the public?
If you're a member of the public attending in person, please make your way to the podium. Chair Jones-Carter, I don't see anybody making their way to the podium. Let me check Zoom. As a reminder, for members of the public joining via Zoom, you can select the raise hand icon to make a comment. If you're calling in, please press *9. Board Member Jones-Carter, I don't see any hands raised.
Public comment is closed. Item 4, board business, statement of purpose. Zoning Code Chapter 20-52.030F, project review. This review authority shall consider the location, design, site plan configuration, and the overall effect of the proposed project upon surrounding properties and the city in general. Review shall be conducted by comparing the proposed project to the general plan, any applicable specific plan, applicable zoning code standards and requirements, consistency of the project within the city's design guidelines, architectural criteria for special areas, and other applicable city requirements. Item 4.2, board member reports. Are there any board member reports? None to report. Item 4.3, we have none. And item 5, department reports.
Thank you, Chair and members of the board. I have no department reports this evening. Thank you.
Item 6, statement of I cannot say this word. Thank you. Are there any abstentions on item 8.1? None? Thank you. Item 8, scheduled items.
Chair Jones-Carter, you skipped over item 7, consent items.
Sorry. Are there any consent items? None. Thank you. Item 8, scheduled items. We are moving into the first scheduled item, the cannery at Railroad Square. This item is information only, and no action will be taken on the item. I believe project planner Susie will introduce the item, and then the applicant will give a presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, I missed the table there. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. I want to say thank you first to the applicant team for doing this. This is really going above and beyond. This is an approved project that never went before any of the boards that would have normally seen it, including the Waterways Advisory Committee, the Cultural Heritage Board, and the Design Review Board. Last night, they did a presentation that was very similar to what you'll see tonight, but really focused more on Cultural Heritage Board matters, if you will, and they got a really nice review from the Cultural Heritage Board. Their two concerns really were addressed to the pathway, the promenade that extends down to the creek, and the hope that at one point that will actually connect to 4th Street, but that segment will be constructed with this project. And then the other one was about the water tower. So we really went through that last night, and then tonight they're really focusing more on matters of interest to this board. So with that, I'm going to also put another reminder that the project architect will need to leave at 5:30 promptly. The rest of the team is still here to answer questions, but if during the presentation you could make notes on your architecture-related questions, and then other questions we can kind of follow through with the applicant team afterwards, after Mimi Sullivan leaves. Okay, and thank you very much. Oh, and I'm sorry. Michelle Gervais from the project team, and I'm going to let her introduce the other members, so take it away.
Thank you. I can't say anything without first starting with kudos to the city. It's worth noting that we've actually been working on this since the property was acquired in last century in 1998 and 99. There's a bit of history I'll go into. I can answer more after Mimi's gone, but in this latest round of entitlements, and we have been before many boards over many years with different variations on the theme, but for this project in particular, and thanks to the SB 35 process, and especially thanks to Susie and company, this miraculously was approved in a very timely way. So in the interest of time, I will move on, but we can't say enough good. So my name is Michelle Gervais. I'm a local planning and development consultant. The John Stewart Company has really been the known lead of a partnership that purchased this property, as I said, last century. It was really, it flowed from a grassroots community-based project that was known as ROJECT, which is all about downtown revitalization, and hundreds of people participated in those years in this revisioning of how to connect and really fortify life in downtown, arts, culture, food, wine, transportation, and connectability and housing, and then the policy that supported that. People eyeballed this property that used to be 2 buildings that connected, and with a cannery line going through it, conveyor belt, and they saw that this idea of the 4th Street connection to the creek would be awesome if it weren't for those buildings that were in the way. John Stewart and Rick Devine bought into the vision, and between the vision and the practicality of site cleanup, which meant taking down buildings to get to old storage, oil tanks, and then soil cleanup and toxic remediation and groundwater cleanup, and lots of it, almost $7 million of cleanup that they absorbed themselves. They then had sites ready for proposed development, and they had this 4th Street corridor. In 2003, Susan Clark authored the historic reports that cleared the path for the partial demolition, retaining the walls that contributed to the historic fabric of the National Registered Historic Railroad Square Association. That's why you see those remnant walls. And then the rest of the 5-story building could come down to make way for the site clearance and housing. There's been a lot of drama since then, but John Stewart was a fabulous man and great storyteller, and it was almost like that Academy Award-winning movie this year. It had every genre of story in our trajectory since, and he was willing to sell the film rights, but not the water tower, and so I could tell you more about that later. For now, though, I think it's best in the interest of time, I will turn over the microphone. Dawn Lesty, who is Director of Development for the John Stewart Company, and Mimi Sullivan with Cita Sullivan. She is probably, I would say, singularly the most involved team member. They have done probably 100 different variations on themes of, probably 20 themes of development plans. So she has lots to offer. We have had, it's just also worth noting, in addition to Susan Clark, Diana Painter, whom you may know, she's done a lot of work in Santa Rosa, and also Stacy DeShazo were both involved as historical consultants along the way. And so, Dawn, I'm going to turn it over to you and then to Mimi.
Good evening. This is Don Lusky. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, you can? Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you. You're good, Don.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good evening, board chair and board members. Thanks for letting us present tonight. This project that, as Michelle has so eloquently described, is 20-plus years in the making. We're super excited about it. I think, I've been doing this for about 25 years, and I think this probably is the most transformative affordable housing project I've ever worked on, just in terms of what we envision will happen.
Sorry, Dawn. I'm sorry, Dawn. I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're having a hard time hearing you again.
Well.
Is there a way to speak really loudly? It's clear, but
Is this
quiet.
better?
Try again.
Is this better? I don't. Is this better?
They're looking at the controls to see if they can make you any louder.
Yeah, I mean, I tried my headphones last night, as you know, didn't work, and I'm calling in on the call-in line, so I'm not really sure what else to do. If you can't hear me, why don't you just run through the project overview and the timeline, and then
Why don't we go to the project overview and just speak slowly but loudly? Thank you.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah, go for
Can
it.
you hear me? Okay, so we're looking at the timeline. This project was entitled under SB 35 in August of 2020, which was a state proposition designed to expedite the entitlement of affordable housing. We closed our construction financing a couple of years later in 2022. We started construction immediately, and we anticipate being finished with construction in early 2025. You can go to the next slide. This project is 129 units. 128 of those units will be affordable to low-income families earning between 30% and 80% of area median income, with a set-aside of 25% of those units, 32 units, for formerly homeless families who will be referred to the project through the Housing Authority and who will come with project-based Section 8 vouchers to subsidize their rent. You can see the monthly rents on this screen depending on the level of affordability for that unit. There are 52 parking spaces, 50 bike spaces, and a large community space with adjoining patio, computer lab, lots of outdoor amenity on the backside of the property towards the creek, and most importantly, the installation of the pedestrian promenade that will link the new road that we're putting in with the Prince Memorial Greenway, and eventually, as Michelle and Susie mentioned, hopefully connect to 4th Street through the Cornerstone property. I'm going to turn over to our architect because I think most of your questions will be directed to her, but I'm happy to stay and answer questions later. Thank you.
Your turn, Mimi.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, and community members. Thank you, as Dawn and Michelle have already stated, for inviting us this evening to share a project that is near and dear to our hearts and really a labor of love. I say that because we started on the project with Michelle in 2005, so you can do the math. 18 years later, we could not be more thrilled it's coming out of the ground. The view in front of you should be a view that most of you probably recognize with the cannery walls that are existing out on site today. This is from West 3rd Street, and you will see the 2 cannery walls that are being preserved, the loading docks as well, and the metal canopy along West 3rd. We are keeping the clear story openings and providing some cable rail, because we've set the building back, the new building that is, back from the cannery walls, approximately 12 feet. Behind that and the clear story level are individual unit patios for the most part, and at the far end near the promenade, which we can talk about later, is a community room that has a community patio. So the idea was to still activate and see activity and people through the clear story by setting the building back. And also by setting the building back, which was important to us to accentuate and make more visible, we hope, the historic walls. In this view, you'll also see there are balconies. There's a lot of modulation in terms of the building mass, both in its roof line and in its vertical and horizontal elements. And the color scheme is really coming from a long process with the historian who was a consultant to our NEPA consultant, and who wanted the new building to be more quiet, if you will, I guess that's a word I'll use. And so we worked through several color schemes to try and complement the brick, not copy the brick, yet be sort of rich in its materiality and colors, but not too overwhelming. So let's go to the next slide. Here's a view we did to illustrate the view down 4th Street. You can see the historic railroad station there on the right, and the wall in the distance, the cannery wall in the building rising up behind it, and the water tower. We'll go to the next slide. Here's the site plan, and on the top of your screen would be the new street. We'll call it A Street. It doesn't really have a name yet. That will be provided. Oops, let's go back one. Sorry. Thanks. A Street, and that is running the long length of the existing cannery brick wall, and you'll see the loading dock there with the sort of trapezoidal edge. And then to the left is the public promenade. And so the development team decided to actually do a lot line adjustment, and that was the way that this public promenade could be provided. So they did move the lot line approximately 40 feet over from the edge of the existing cannery to provide this public access. As has been mentioned, from what we hope is a through line connection to 4th Street. We will do our part to provide that from the new street across this development down to the creek trail. This diagram also shows the backyard for the residents, which includes a number of different outdoor amenities. There's sort of an outdoor green. There are some picnic tables with an olive bosque, hearkening back to the orchards and the history of the cannery itself. There's an outdoor deck for the residents. There's a tot lot that's adjacent to a laundry room, etc. The white, obviously, is the building footprint. You'll notice, too, that the footprint of the building from left to right sort of steps in conjunction with the property line and sort of the curve of the creek. So that's actually not a sort of flat composition against the creek. It actually has 3 wings and modulation, too. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is actually the podium plan, second floor. And this was really to illustrate, again, how the building has these carve-outs of 2 fairly large courtyards, and then the 3 wings of the building surrounding those courtyards. So again, more amenity space. I failed to tell you, too, one of the reasons, of course, for activating that backyard in a robust way was to provide more visibility and eyes on the creek. So we have, at the ground level, all the things that I just described, and on the podium level, we have units and obviously the courtyard spaces, too. And then as you go up the building, more units. So a lot of visibility on the creek with this project. Let's go to the next. Okay, this is the elevation for West 3rd Street, showing the brick wall, the canopy, and then again the building, the new building, rising up behind it. Here, I guess what I would like to point out, because you saw the modulation in the perspective, here what I'll point out is some of the materiality. So the vertical stripes is a board and batten material. The surface that doesn't have a stripe, if you will, is a cement plaster. And then we described earlier the metal balconies, and then this metal stair, kind of a sculptural stair to activate, again, the 3rd Street facade. Okay, let's go to the next. This is facing A Street, if you will, the new street, and the Cornerstone property in the future, and the longer side of the existing brick wall and dock. And again, the building rising above it, stepping back from it. And again, just material-wise, we have the board and batten and the vertical stripe. We have a horizontal stripe in this particular facade indicating a lap siding, and then again the smooth plaster finish. Okay, excuse me. We do also, I'll point out, we have the one garage entry along this facade. If you look to the right of your screen, it's the 4th bay in. So on the ground level behind the brick wall is a parking garage for the most part, and obviously needed utility, electrical rooms and those kinds of utility spaces as well. Okay, let's go to the next. This elevation is along the public promenade. You'll see from left to right the last sort of bay of the existing or historic brick wall, turning the corner there. The main entry to the development is that 2-story storefront glazed with the double doors. That is the main lobby into the project. And above that is the one of the sort of the main spine of the corridor running the length of the building as well. And then we have a second sculptural stair. Hopefully we want people to really use that stair and again, sort of be visible coming and going and activating that edge. And then the same materials wrapping around in terms of the vertical board and batten siding and the plaster and the horizontal lap siding. Okay, next slide. And this is the facade facing the creek. It's a little bit hard to read just because it's 2-dimensional. That's why we showed the 2nd floor podium plan. So if you recall that, we had the 2 large courtyards that the 3 wings were defining. So those courtyards, on the left from line E to G is the first courtyard that starts at the podium level. It goes open to the sky. And then from lines L to N is the 2nd courtyard, again starting at the podium level and open to the sky. Same materials are applied around this facade as well. So, okay, go to the next slide. Okay, so here's just a summary of the historic resources that we're preserving, the 2 brick walls that we have shown, the canopy and the loading docks. The landscaping is not obscuring these historic elements, so we've kept that to a very minimum along those facades, and there's a much more robust landscaping on the back and along the public promenade. I mentioned the olive bosque or orchard, harkening back to the cannery history where we were providing picnic tables for the residents to enjoy. And the water tower is now tied to the future Plant 5 project next door. Okay, next slide. It's an interesting project from a design perspective because as you are seeing, each of the 4 sides is pretty unique in terms of what they're facing, the street, the creek, the promenade, and so it's an opportunity to use a variety of materials and textures and purposefully contrast those with the historic brick walls. I mentioned we stepped the new building back as well to highlight the historic walls. And by doing that, it's kind of a double, gets a double duty in a way. We're stepping back to honor the brick wall, also creating space in between for patios and for the community room, collective patio as well. Mentioned in that podium plan, the way the building is carved out on the backside around those two courtyards, creating the three wings and the two courtyards. That's the next bullet point. And the building modulation, both horizontally and vertically, is very true to the objective design standards, working with Susie and the planning department to make sure we did get as much modulation and shadow and variation through materials and massing that we could. And then the two exterior metal stairs, picking up on some industrial material vocabulary, and also really, as I mentioned, trying to activate those facades, hoping people will really come up and down quite a bit. And the next slide. And the creek considerations, we heard early and often from the community that eyes on the creek 24/7, 365 are really important, and we understand why, and we agree. So we've done everything we can to activate the backside of the property in the ways that I've described, and also all the units that will now look over the creek. The promenade, creating that public access for pedestrians and cyclists is really important to all of us in the project, and we hope to the community as well. And eventually, again, hopefully connecting through a through line all the way to 4th Street in the Historic Railroad Square commercial area. The landscaping is meeting all the water efficient landscape requirements. It's providing a buffer between the building and the creek trail. It's serving a lot of recreational needs in the backyard for the residents, and is sensitive to the wildlife setting. And the next slide, please. Oh, that was it. Sorry. I thought there was more. Okay. So I'll turn it back over to Susie and Michelle then.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Well, that really concludes the presentation, and as mentioned, it's been under construction now for a couple months. Just out there today, the podium is going up for the parking, and it's exciting. A lot of work to be done. I did hear that I think framing will be done this calendar year, so it'll be interesting to see then, what the scale might start to feel like. But we're here to answer questions, and I'll be quiet.
Do this. Are there any questions from the board to staff or the presenter? And maybe we should direct the questions to the architect first, since they have a time schedule.
Well, thank you.
No questions? Oh, my.
We realize too that it's a bit strange that we're sharing something with you for which your comments are appreciated, but being incorporated at this stage is probably a management consideration, maybe more than a design one. But if you have questions, people are going to be seeing it go up. They might ask about things. We want you to feel fully equipped. I think we will.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Artificial turf is...
We don't have a landscape member on the team, but Mimi, you've been working with them a bit. Would you like to speak to the landscape artificial turf?
I think that was a decision both landscape and property management decided on, to be honest about it. Don, I don't know if you recall, if we talked about having actual turf, but then there were just challenges with maintenance and water efficiency. I think that was another concern, or maybe what do I want to call it? Sort of a prohibition, because there was only so much water for the irrigation, and trying to keep it very water efficient. That might have played into it too. I apologize, I don't have a really clear recollection of that decision making.
I just bring it up because I know that there are some environmental concerns about using artificial turf in the breakdown of the sub tires. So, my 2 cents.
Okay.
I'm not sure if, can you hear me? I'm not really sure if you can, but if you can, it really was about water, I think. Mimi, you're correct.
Did you all hear that?
No.
He said, it sounded like he said it was about the water. That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, for, a lot of playgrounds and also multifamily developments, we are seeing a lot of artificial turf just in our design space because we can't meet, grass is a very thirsty plant as things go. So yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of turf for durability. We're doing a lot of other stuff that's not grass for playgrounds and things like that. So, I mean, I'm not surprised by it from a design perspective, because it'll probably last longer than real grass would. And hopefully, pets and stuff won't be relieving themselves on the artificial turf either. So which would also kill the grass.
I didn't point out, if I could just address your pet comment, which is great. There is a little pet relief area off to the side there. So we hope that people are not going to let their pets go out there too. We've given them a space to go to.
Are there any, yes, go ahead, Vic.
A brief question about I guess it's really a hypothetical, is the water tower, which I understand is part of a next phase or another phase. How far is it from the apartments that are right there on the back? There's one image where I was like, oh, am I looking, if I were in that apartment, how far is it away from the building?
Michelle, do you want me to speak to that?
Sure.
Yeah. So in that rendering that we showed you early, the water tower was on the promenade at that point in time. This is quite a while back, I will admit, and it was fairly close to the building, and that wasn't necessarily what everybody wanted, but we also recognized as a team that not everybody would want to walk under the water tower. That might be not very comfortable on the promenade. So we tried to create a path around it as well. But moving forward, and Don can speak to this a bit more, it won't be where this rendering thought it would be at the time. So if it goes up along the closest edge of the Plant 5 site in the future, it would be at least 40 feet away from the cannery units at that point.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
I don't know where it's going to end up on the Plant 5, so that's a hypothetical for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is Don, and we don't know where ultimately we'll be reinstalled as well. We don't have any plans yet for Plant 5.
But not closer, right?
Oh, definitely not closer. I actually had the same thought when I saw that rendering. Open my window and I'm looking at a big water tower.
There was a stack of probably 2 units that were, I mean, I'm not saying that's inconsequential, but you're right, and we recognize that too. So it was not an easy element to find the right home for, to be honest, just given those kinds of challenges. But again, when it goes on Plant 5, if it were placed at the closest edge, it would be 40 feet away. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'd like to open public comment on item 8.1.
If you're attending in person, please make your way to the podium.
Hi, I'm Leanne Wentz, here with Ann Galantine. We're both members of the Saturday Afternoon Club. And we're part of the history section. We're very interested in keeping history. So our focus is the water tower. And I had a couple questions. I was here yesterday too, so this is the second time I've heard your presentation. And what is this Plant 5 project? And you're talking about maybe we'll put it on the property line of that. And I'm just wondering, isn't that where the other wall begins? And is there going to be an attempt to save that wall as well? I'm sorry, I should first ask, are you folks part of the Plant 5 project, or is that owned by someone else in another project altogether?
I don't know what the Plant 5 project.
You can go ahead and list off your questions, and then we can respond after the public comment period ends.
Okay.
Thank you.
I didn't know how that worked.
No,
okay.
No problem.
So that's the question on, so the next question is, where is the property line? I think it originally was right down the middle between the two walls, which would be in line with the middle of 4th Street. And was the water tower originally straddling that line between the two properties? I'm interested in seeing that the water tower stays center of 4th Street so that visually from Railroad Square you can see it. But it's kind of close to those buildings. And the other building for Project 5 or Plant 5, it will be really important to know the elevation wall there and how close that is to the other side of that promenade. Okay, so I think that's it. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Chair Jones-Carter, we don't have any members of the public participating via Zoom, just the applicant team.
Thank you. Staff, would you like to try and address the question?
I have a follow-up question, kind of tied to all that, to the public comment, if that's okay. So I was looking on Google Earth, and it looks to me like currently the water tower is north of 4th Street, north of the property line. It's like on the, I guess, the other lot where you did the lot line adjustment, right? So it's to the north, and then I was actually looking at there's a bunch of trees in the way, right? Currently on 4th Street, are they gone? Or you can't always trust Google Street View because, you know, things change. But yeah, there's a bunch of trees along Railroad Square, right? And you can't actually, when you look down 4th Street, also per the rendering, you actually don't see the northern chunk of lot in between the Cannery and the 6th Street Playhouse, right? Kind of, at least from 4th Street. Is that right? Am I misunderstanding that?
Chair, sorry to jump in. I think we still need to close the public comment period. Thank you.
Thank you. We are closing the public comment on item 8.1.
But yeah, do you get you get my question, right? Because it's tied together in terms of like the view corridor.
This one first and
the photo you guys.
It's not a straight shot.
It's not quite a straight shot. It's kind of like a oblong kind of shot, I guess.
we're going to bring up a couple of the slides here to help.
Dawn, would you like me to speak to the water tower and future for Plant 5, or would you like to?
I can just say that, you know, we understand the importance of the water tower, but we don't have any plans yet for Plant 5. We were trying to avoid putting the tower directly in the middle of the public promenade because we didn't think folks everyone would want to walk under it. So, I mean, there's a lot left to design, and Michelle, you can take over from here. I think you understand where we are.
Yeah, and thank you, Don. I think you'll like this bit of history, that the lot line, well, what you're looking at right now, when you look at the, to the left of the slide, the white edge of the building there, the brick wall wraps around the corner at the top, and then just below that, where is now our entrance, that's where the Plant 5 building used to connect. So the property line hugged the edge of the building. And then on the creek side of Plant 5, yeah, like right where your cursor is, Amy, thank you, or Susie, in that vicinity was where the water tower had been, back by kind of the, yeah, right in, yeah, a little south of there, or west of there, and toward the creek. So it had been on the Plant 5 parcel, yeah, kind of toward that edge of the building. The point being that it's now, the property line has shifted to the opposite side of that pedestrian pathway so that it could all be part of this project. But the water tower is not in this project because it had vested with the Plant 5 site. And then, frankly, nobody, it's awkward to talk about money, but it's worth noting as decision makers that besides writing off several million dollars worth of site cleanup that had not been known about at the time of acquisition, groundwater and soil remediation, and a few big, huge tank extractions and other things. Those walls cost about $5 million. By the time they were maintained, tied back, designed around, and so forth. So keeping those walls was a very expensive venture. And ultimately, Don, I'll just speak to this because of the sound issues, but the cost per unit is almost $750,000 a unit. It's an expense, and it's not fancy. It's wonderful. It's wonderful, but it's expensive. And so the water tower, which is a sizable structure, which needs to be done properly in terms of restoration, that also is a very big expense. The fact that it happened to tie to Plant 5 in historic context is a blessing because we wouldn't have a project if that had to be paid for also right now. So just something to know as you're looking at projects and how they come forward and what's entailed. It is a beloved element by the project team. And so to answer the question, Plant 5 is owned by the same group that owned the Cannery projects, or maybe there's some legal constructs, but it's the same people. And John Stewart was the real visionary leader of it all, and the water tower is beloved by him, and so it will be protected and preserved. But the good news is there is room in time to talk about exactly where that should go, maybe exactly what goes on it. I don't think John would want his picture on it, but what it is a community asset in a way that there's room to talk about. So let's see if we got all those questions. The property line, Plant 5 plan is yet way yet to be determined. I think those were the questions.
Yeah, and I think, to just
the
I think wrap this up. What I was trying to look at is, 4th Street and the proposed A Street, yeah. Right? They're really not going to be orthogonal to one another.
Right.
They'll be close, but they're going to be a little.
Yeah, nothing's plumb.
Yeah, nothing's exactly. Yeah, nothing's going to be exactly orthogonal with one another. So I think to your point, as you finish this project, the Cannery project, and as you move on to the next project, it's going to take some adjusting and monkeying to find the best spot for it that works from a context perspective, right. Financial perspective, right? Because when the Plant 5 site eventually does get designed or whatever, it may not work where it is. It may not work where you guys kind of have it planned now. It may not tie into the promenade, all that kind of stuff. You're not going to know until you kind of live in it a little bit, I think.
An earlier plan, at one point this development team was also the developer of the SMART site. That changed along the way, but in those pretty popular plans. The water tower had been brought forward. It's still on the 4th Street access, but it was closer to the rail line and more visible, because it is a challenge when if Plant 5 becomes, you know, a taller building with housing, it's back up at the same concern, and it may be dwarfed, it may be an impediment to, you know, comfortable views of the residents, all sorts of things. So maybe it belongs on the SMART site. We're here to share. It's just what works best for the kind of district vision.
And you're exactly right. We saw, Adam, do you remember when that was, when we saw the SMART site, the master plan for the SMART site? It was like a year and a half ago? Yeah, and but there's a different developer for the SMART site, which then has, I think their plans call for, 5 buildings of housing, plus a promenade that would potentially connect to yours, plus, you know, interconnectivity to both the public, the SMART train station, plus a connection to the trail to get into the trailway. I mean, so there's a lot of kind of elements here, both competing and working for each other at the same time, and I think that's the challenge. Is, so, you know, you guys are the first domino, right, in many ways, and so you're going to set the precedent for the development of the surrounding properties, and then they're going to key off on you and what was done, and then, you know, you may not even know the site for that water tower until that's all kind of landed in many ways. So yeah, I think that's important context to think about too for members of the public, to know, like, if you didn't know that there's development plan for the SMART site, then you'd be like, it lacks context not knowing the other pieces.
Let's see, does anyone have a comment to make before we adjourn? We've had discussion, questions, any comments?
I have a comment.
Drew?
Yeah.
Adam, sorry.
That's fine. My comment is really just to thank you for coming and thanking the applicant team. They're off in the ether. Usually I'm on the other side of being remote, and so it's interesting to hear the disembodied voices. But just to thank you for coming and presenting to us, and then for also for sticking with this project and fighting for decades to see this happen. And it's good to see a quality project come out of this SB 35 process too, you know, with the review as well, and so commending staff for that process as well. I personally, I'm really excited to, one, see this design, and two, see that it has been under construction, and looking forward to the future, and just really expressing thanks for giving us this context, giving multiple public meetings for the public being responsive too. So thanks very much for that, and really excited to see this happen.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
I had a comment about the architecture. I remember seeing this in the Press Democrat, and it had a totally different color scheme, and I had a small panic attack. To see the new color scheme, I really I want to commend the project team for making that shift, because I think the palette here is much more contextual, not only to the relationship to the other elements within Railroad Square. What's so unique about Railroad Square is that it kind of is the only place in Santa Rosa that has lots of brick, lots of masonry. There's the Hotel La Rose or whatever, that's a total masonry building, big, you know, granite stones and stuff. So it's really nice to see the shift. So I want to commend the architect for, I think, either hearing from somebody or making the decision on their own to shift the palette to really meld much better. I think the colors are bold and inviting and interesting and unique. It's definitely going to fit in line with some of the other projects that are either almost completed or soon to be constructed, in terms of like some really unique and iconic architecture that is not your kind of standard garden apartment. And I think that's what's really special about these projects that are happening downtown, like 420 Mendocino, which is a David Baker project. It's going to have like Corten steel on it and other kind of random stuff. Of course, Dave Baker. And then there's the TLCD project on 4th Street that has yellow and gray and some other kind of really nice colors. So, and I think this will fit within that context because it's bold architecturally, but in a way that fits. And so I appreciate that. So thank you.
No other comments? Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I enjoyed it, and anytime we can get some affordable housing done, I'm really excited to see that happen. And with that, this meeting of the Design Review Board is now adjourned.
Thank you very much.